All right. So, chapter 16. I fell hard on the ground and sprained my arm. I screamed with pain, and then twisting away from my hairy figure above me. Before I could do anything, he was crouching by my side with a fierce look on his face. Oh, hey, man. I didn't hurt you, did I? He had a friendly voice, and I realized my life wasn't in danger. The look on his face was one of concern, not anger. I didn't mean to freak you out, the man said. I was just trying to scare you a little, man, for fun. I sat up and rubbed my elbow. I'm okay. I said, You're sure? It ain't broken, is it? I've got herbs that can fix it if it is. Herbs can't fix broken bones, Sam said. He was now standing beside Evra. They sure can't, the stranger agreed. But they can elevate you to planes of consciousness where worldly concerns like broken bones are nothing but minor blips on the cosmic map. He paused and stroked his beard. Of course, they burn out your brain cells too. Sam's blank face showed that he even didn't understand that long sentence. I'm okay, I said again. I stood up and rotated my arm. I just twisted it. It'll be fine in a couple of minutes. Man, that's good to hear, the stranger said. I'd hate to be the cause of bodily harm. Hurt's a bad trip, man. I studied him in more detail. He was big and chubby, with a bushy black beard and long, scraggly hair. His clothes were dirty, and there was no way he had a bath recently, because he stank to high heaven. That's what the strange smell had been. He was really friendly looking. It made me feel stupid thinking about how afraid of him I'd been. Are you guys locals? The man asked. I am, Sam said. These guys are with the circus. Circus, the man smiled. There's a circus around here. Question mark. Oh, man. How did I miss this? Where is it? I love the circus. I never passed up a chance to see clowns in action. It's not that sort of circus, Sam told him. It's a freak show. A freak show? The man stared at Sam, then at Evra, whose scales and color pretty much marked him out of one of the performers. Are you part of the freak show, ma'am? He asked. Evra nodded shyly. They don't mistreat you, do they? The man asked. They don't whip you, or underfeed you, or make you do things you don't want to. No, Evra shook his head. Oh, I have to click on here. You're there of your own free will. Yes, Ever said. All of us are. It's our home. Oh, well, that's okay, the man said, smiling again. You hear rumors about those small traveling shows. He slapped his forehead. Oh, man, I hadn't noticed myself, have I? I'm so dumb sometimes. RV's the name. RV, that's a funny name, I remarked. He coughed with embarrassment. Well, he said, lowering his voice to a whisper, it's short for Reggie Veggie. Reggie Veggie, I laughed. Yeah, he said, Reggie's my real name, Reggie. Veggie's what they called me in school because I'm a vegetarian. Well, I never liked that, so I asked them to call me RV instead. Some did, but not many. He looked miserable at the memory. You can call me Reggie Veggie if you want, he told us. RV is fine by me, I assured him. Me too, Evra. And me, Sam added. Cool, RV brightened up. So that's my name out in the open. How about you three? Darren Sean, I told him, and we shook hands. Sam Grest. Ever Von what? RV asked, as if I hadn't when I first met Evra. Just plain Vaughn, Ever said. Oh, RV smiled. Cool. RV was an eco warrior, here to stop a road from being built. He was a member of NOPE, Nature's Opposing Protectors, and had traveled the country saving forests and lakes and animals and stuff like that. We offered to show us around the camp, and we jumped at the chance. The railway station could wait. This was an opportunity that wouldn't come every day. He talked about the environment nonstop as we walked. He told us about all the crappy things being done to Mother Nature, the forests we were destroying, the rivers we were polluting, the air we were poisoning, the animals we were driving to extinction. And this is all in our own country, he said. I'm not talking about stuff happening somewhere else. This is what we're doing to our own land. Nope was fighting to save the earth from greedy, dangerous humans who didn't care what they did to it. They journeyed up and down the country trying to make other people aware of the dangers. They gave out pamphlets and books about how to protect the environment. But raising awareness ain't enough, RV told us. It's a start, but we must do more. We have to stop pollution and destruction of the countryside. Take this place. They're going to build a road through an old burial ground, a place where people buried their dead thousands of years ago. Can you imagine that, man? Destroying a part of history just to save drivers 10 or 20 minutes? RV shook his head sadly. These are crazy times, man, he said. The things we're doing to this planet in the future, assuming there is one, people will look back on what we've done and call us idiotic barbarians. He was very passionate about the environment, and after listening to him for a while, so were Sam, Ever, and me. I hadn't thought about it much before, but after a couple hours at RV, I realized I should have. As RV said, those who don't think and act now can't complain when the world crumbles around their ears later. His campsite was an interesting place. The people, 20 or so, slept in handmade huts that had been built out of branches and leaves and shrubs. Most were as dirty and smelly as RV, but they were also cheerful and kind and generous. How did you stop the road from being built? Sam asked. We dug tunnels under the land, RV said, and we sabotaged the machines they sent in. And we alerted the media. Rich dudes hate having cameras pointed at them. One TV news crew is as good as 20 active warriors. Ever asked RV if they ever fought hand to hand. RV said nope, didn't believe in violent confrontation, but we could see from the look on his face that he wasn't happy about that. If I had my way, he said, we'd give as good as we got. We're too nice sometimes, man. If I was in charge, we'd give those turkeys a taste of hell. RV invited us to stay for lunch. It wasn't very good food. There was no meat, just a bunch of vegetables and rice and fruit. But we ate a lot to be polite. They had a lot of mushrooms as well, big and oddly colored, but RV wouldn't let us eat any of those. When you're old man, he said with a laugh. We left soon after lunch. The members of Nope had duties and jobs they had to do, and we didn't want to be in the way. RV told us we would come back any time, but that they'd probably be moving on in a couple of days. We almost won the fight here, he said. Another few days and it'll have been time to strike out for new pastures. Battles come and go, man, but the war is never ending. We waved a goodbye and headed for home. That RV's weird, Sam said after a while. Can you imagine giving up everything to go off and fight for animals in the countryside? He's doing what he believes in, Ever said. I know, Sam said. I think it's cool that he's doing it. We need people like him. It's too bad that there aren't more of them. Still, it's a weird way to live, don't you think? You'd have to be pretty dedicated. I don't think I could become an environmental warrior. Me neither, I agreed. I could, Ever said. You could not, I scoffed. Why not? He asked. I could take my snake and live with them and fight with them. You just couldn't, I insisted. Why not? Because you're not smelly enough, I laughed. Ever made a face. They were a little on the crunchy granola side, weren't they? He admitted. They smelled worse than my feet when I hadn't changed my socks for a week, Sam exclaimed. Still, Ever said, I could think of lots of ways to spend time when I grow up. I'd kind of like to be like RV. Me too, Sam said. I shrugged. I guess I could get used to it. We were in a good mood and talked about Nope and RV the whole way back to camp. None of us had any idea the trouble the nice eco warrior would soon create, or the tragedy he would unintentionally cause. Cringe. Chapter 17. The next few days went by lazily. Ever and me were kept busy with our chores with feeding the little people. I tried talking to a couple of the silent blue-hooded creatures, but none of them looked at me when I spoke. It was impossible to tell them apart. One stood out because he or she, or it, was taller than the others, and one was shorter, and another limped on his left leg. But the rest looked exactly alike. Sam was helping out more and more around camp. We didn't take him with us when we went hunting, but we let him pitch in most of our other jobs. He was a hard worker, determined to impress us, and earn himself a full position with the Cirque. I didn't see much of Mr. Crespley. He knew I had to be up early to hunt for the little people's food, so he left me alone most of the time. I was happy that way. I didn't want him bugging me about drinking human blood. Then Cormac Limbs arrived early one morning, which caused great excitement. You got to see this guy, Ever said, dragging me from behind him. He's the most amazing performer who ever lived. There was already a large crowd around Cormac when we arrived at Mr. Tall's van, where he reported into. People were slapping him on the back and asking what he'd been up to and where he'd been. He smiled at everybody, shook hands, and unanswered questions. He might have been a star, but he wasn't big-headed. Ever Vaughn, he shouted when he saw the snake boy. He reached over and gave Ever a hug. How's the favorite two-legged reptile? Fine, Ever said. Have you shed your skin lately? Cormac asked. Not recently, Ever said. Remember, Cormac said, I want it when you do. It's valuable. Human snake skin is worth more than gold in some countries. You could have as much of it as you like, Ever assured him. Then he pushed me forward. Cormac, this is Darren Shawn, a friend of mine. He's new at the Cirque and hasn't seen you before. Never seen Cormac Limbs, Cormac shouted, pretending to be upset. How can this be? I thought everyone in the world had seen the magnificent Cormac Limbs in action. I've never heard of you, I told him. He clutched his chest as though suffering a heart attack. What do you do? I asked. Cormac looked around the crowd. Should I give a demonstration? Yeah, they shouted eagerly. Cormac looked at Mr. Tall, standing on the back of the crowd. Mr. Tall sighed and nodded. You may as well. They won't leave you alone until you do. All right, then, Cormac said. Stand back and give me some room. The crowd moved back immediately. I started to move with them, but Cormac laid a hand on my shoulder and told me to stay. Now, he said to the crowd, I've been traveling for a long time, and I'm too tired to go through my entire routine, so we'll keep this short and sweet. He made his right hand into a fist and stuck out his index finger. Darren, will you put this finger in your mouth, he asked. I glanced at Evra, who signaled for me to do what Cormac asked. Now, Cormac said, bite down on it, please. I bit softly. Harder. I bit harder. Come on, boy, Cormac shouted. Put some backbone into it. Work those jaws. Are you a shark or a mouse? Okay, he wanted me to bite harder than I would. I opened my mouth and bit down quickly, meaning to give him a shock. Instead, I was the one who was shocked because I bit clean through the finger and snapped it right off. I fell back in terror and spat the dead finger from my mouth. My eyes shot up at Cormac Limbs. I expected him to scream, but he had only laughed and held up his hand. There was no blood where I bit the finger off, only a white, jagged stump. As I watched, the most amazing thing happened. The finger began to grow back. I thought I had to be imagining it, but as the seconds passed, it kept growing, and pretty soon it was full length again. Cormac held it rigidly in place for a few seconds and flexed it out to show it was as good as new. The crowd cheered, and I felt my heart slowly back down to normal. I looked down at the ground, where I'd spat out the finger, and saw it beginning to rot. Within a few minutes, it was nothing more than a grayish mound of mold. Sorry if I frightened you, Cormac said, giving my head a pat. That's okay, I told him. I should have learned by now to expect the unexpected around here. Can I feel the new finger? He nodded. It didn't feel different from any others. How do you do it? I asked, amazed. Is it an illusion? No illusion, he said. That's why they call me Cormac Limbs. I've been able to grow new limbs, fingers, toes, arms, legs, ever since I was a toddler. My parents discovered my talent when I had an accident with the kitchen knife and cut off part of my nose. I can grow back virtually any part of my body, except my head. I haven't tried cutting that off. I guess it's best not to tempt fate. Doesn't it hurt? I asked. A little, he said, but not much. When one of my limbs gets cut off, a new one starts to grow almost immediately, so there's only a second or two of pain. It's a little like... Come, Mr. Tall bellowed, cutting him short. We don't have time for detailed description. This show has been idle far too long. It's time we entertain the public again before they forget about us or think we're retired. People, he shouted to the crowd and clapped his hands together. Spread the word. The lull is over. The show goes on tonight. All right. Chapter 18. The camp was buzzing with activity all afternoon. People were running around like crazy. A bunch of them were working on putting together the circus tent. I hadn't seen it before. It was an impressive sight when it was done. Tall and round and red, decorated pictures of the performers. Ever and me were kept busy, hammering pegs into the ground to show the tent in place, arranging seats inside, setting up the stage for the show, preparing props for the performers. We had to find tin cans and nuts and bowls for Ramit's two bellies to eat, and help move the Wolfman's cage inside the tent, and so on. It was a huge operation, but it moved with incredible speed. Everyone in the camp knew their place and what to expect of them. There was never really any panic over the story of the course of the day. Everybody worked as part of it, a team, and things came together smoothly. Sam showed up early in the afternoon. I would have kept him around to help with the work, but Ever said he'd be in the way, so we told him he had to take off. He was upset and slouched off, kicking an empty soda can along in front of him. I felt sorry for him, then realized how I could cheer him up. Sam, wait a minute, I shouted. I'll be back in a second. I told Evra, then rushed off to Mr. Tall's van. I knocked once on the door and opened instantly. Mr. Tall was standing inside, and before I could say a word, he held out 2 tickets for entry to the Cirque du Freak. I stared at the tickets, then at Mr. Tall. How did you know? I have my ways, he replied with a smile. I don't have any money, I warned him. I'll take it out of your wages, he said. I frowned. You don't pay me anything. He smiled wide and clever to old me. He handed over the tickets and closed the door in the face before I could thank him. I hurried back to Sam and gave him the tickets. What are these? He asked. Tickets for tonight's show, I told him. One for you and one for RV. Oh, wow. Sam quickly stuck the ticket in his pocket as if he was afraid they might blow away or vanish. Thanks, Darren. No problem, I said. The only thing is it's a late show. We're starting at 11, and it won't be over until nearly 1 in the morning. Will you be able to come? Sure, Sam said. I'll sneak out. Mom and Dad go to bed at 9 every night. They're early birds. If you get caught, I warned him, don't tell him where you're going. My lips are sealed, he promised, then set off to find RV. Except for a quick dinner, there was no other break between then and the start of the show. While Everett left to feed his snake, I set up candles inside the circus tent. There were also 5 huge chandeliers to be hung, 4 above the crowd and 1 over the stage, but the little people took care of those. Mags, a pretty woman who sold souvenirs and candy during the intermission, asked me to help her get the displays ready, so I spent an hour stacking candy spiderwebs and edible glass statues and pieces of the Wolfman's hair. There's a new novelty I hadn't seen before, a small model of Cormac limbs. When he cut off part of it, a new piece grew in its place. I asked Mags how it worked, but she didn't know. It's one of Mr. Tall's inventions, she said. He makes a lot of this stuff himself. I chopped the head off the model and tried peering down the neck to see what was inside, but a new head grew before I could. The models don't last forever, Mag said. They'll rot after a few months. Do you tell people when they're buying them? I asked. Of course, she said. Mr. Tall insists we let the customers know exactly what they're buying. He doesn't approve of conning people. Mr. Crepsley summoned me half an hour before the show began. He was dressed in a stage costume when I entered. Polish Magnum Octa's cage, he ordered. Then brush your suit down and clean yourself up. Why? I asked. You're going on with me, he said. My eyes lit up. You mean I'm part of the act? I gasped. A small part, he said. You could bring the cage on and play the flute when it is Madame Octa's time to spin a web over my mouth. Mr. Charles normally does that, doesn't he? Normally, Mr. Crepsley agreed. But we were short on performers tonight, so he's going to be performing himself. Besides, you're better suited to assisting than him. How so? I asked. You looked creepier, he said. With your pale face and that awful suit, you look like something out of a horror film. That gave me a little bit of a shock. I never thought I was creepy looking. I looked in the mirror and realized I did look sort of frightening, because I hadn't drank human blood. I was a lot paler than I should have been. The dirty suit made me look even more ghost-like. I made up my mind to find something new to wear in the morning. The show started at exactly 11. I didn't expect much of a crowd. We were in the middle of nowhere and hadn't had much time to notice people about the show. But the tent was packed. Where did they all come from? I whispered to Evra as we watched Mr. Tall introduce the Wolfman. Everywhere, he replied quietly. People always know when one of our shows is happening. Besides, even though he told us about it today, Mr. Tall probably knew we'd be playing tonight ever since we set up camp. I watched the show from the wings, enjoying it even more than the first time I'd seen it, because now I knew people involved and felt like part of the family. Hands went on after the Wolfman, followed by Ramis Two Bellies. We had our first break, then Mr. Tall went on stage and darted around the place, never seemed to move, just vanishing from one spot and appearing somewhere new. Next up was Truska. Then it was my turn to go on stage with Mr. Crepsley and Madame Octa. The lights were low, but my vampire vision helped me pick out Sam's and RV's faces in the crowd. They were supposed to see me and clap louder than anybody else. I had to hide my excited smile. Mr. Crepsley had told me to look miserable and glum to impress the crowd. I stood over on one side as Mr. Crepsley made a speech about how deadly Madame Octa was, and then opened the door to her cage as his assistant let a goat on the stage. There was a loud, angry gasp when Madame Octa killed the goat. I really don't appreciate people exclaiming on stream. It came from RV. I knew that I shouldn't have invited him. I'd forgotten how fond he was of animals, but it was too late to take back my invitation. I was pretty nervous when it was my turn to play the flute and control Madame Octa, feeling every set of eyes in the tent focus on me. I never performed for a crowd before, and for a few seconds I was afraid my lips wouldn't work or I'd forgot the tune. But once I started blowing and sending my thoughts to Madame Octa, I did okay. As she weaved her web across Mr. Krebs's lips, it struck me that I could get rid of him now if I wanted. I could make her bite him. The idea shocked me. I thought about killing him before, but never seriously. And not since we joined the Cirque. Now here he was, his life in my hands. All it would take was one slip. I could say it was an accident. Nobody would be able to prove otherwise. I watched the spider move back and forth, up and down, her poisonous fangs glinting under the lights of the chandelier. The heat from the handles was intense. I was sweating a lot. It occurred to me that I could blame the slip of my fingers in the sweat. Over his mouth she spun the web. His hands were down by his sides. He wouldn't be able to stop her. One wrong tit on the flute was all it would take. One broken note to stop the train of thought between the two of us, and I didn't do it. I played perfectly and safely. I wasn't sure why I spared the vampire. Maybe because Mr. Tall might have known I've killed him. Maybe because I needed Mr. Crepsley to teach me how to survive. Maybe because I didn't want to become a killer. Or maybe, just maybe, because I was starting to like the vampire. After all, he brought me to the Cirque and made me part of the act. I wouldn't have met Ever and Sam if it hadn't been for him. He'd been kind to me, as kind as he could be. Whatever the reason, I didn't let Madame Octa kill her master. And at the end of the act, we took our bows and exited together. You thought about killing me, Mr. Crepsley said softly, once we were backstage. What do you mean? I played dumb. You know what I mean, he said. There was a pause. It would not have worked. I milked most of the poison from her fangs before we went on. Killing the goat took the rest out of her. It was a test, I stared at him, and my hatred grew again. I thought you were being nice to me, I cried, and all the time it was just a test. His face was serious. I had to know, he said. I had to know if I could rely on you. Well, listen to this, I growled, standing on my toes so I could go eyeball to eyeball with him. Your test was useless. I didn't kill you this time, but if I ever get the chance again, I'll take it. I stormed off without another word, too upset to stick around to see Cormac Limbs or the end of the show, feeling betrayed even though deep down I knew what he had made sense. Chapter 19. I was still upset the next morning. Ever kept asking me what was wrong, but I couldn't tell him. I didn't want him to know I'd been thinking of killing Mr. Crepsley. Ever told me he'd met Sam and RV after the show. Sam loved it, Ever said, especially Cormac Limbs. He should have stayed to see Cormac in action when he sawed his legs off. I'll see him next time, I said. How did RV take it? Ever frowned. He wasn't happy. Upset at the goat? I asked. Yeah, Ever said. But not just that. I said we bought the goat from a butcher, so it would have been killed anyway. It was the wolf man, the snake, and Mr. Crepsley's spider. Oh, check your Dell eligibility, of course. Mr. Crepsley's spider that bothered him the most. What was wrong with him, I asked. He was afraid they weren't being treated right. He didn't like the idea of them being locked in cages. I told him they weren't, except for the spider. I said the wolf man was really quiet off stage, and I showed him my snake and how she slept with me. Did he believe you about the wolf man, I asked. I think so, Ever said, although he still seemed suspicious when they were leaving. And he was very interested in their eating habits. He wanted to know what we fed them, how often, and where we got the food. We have to be careful with RV. He would cause problems. Luckily, he should have been leaving in a day or two, but until then, beware. The day went by quietly. Sam didn't show up until later on in the afternoon, and none of us were in the mood for playing. It was a cloudy day, and we were out of sorts. Sam only stayed for half an hour, then went home again. Mr. Crepsley summoned me to his van a little after sunset. I wasn't going to go, but decided it was my best not to annoy him too much. He was my guardian after all, and he'd probably have me booted out of the Cirque du Freak. What do you want? I snapped when I arrived. Stand over here, where I can see you better, the vampire said. He tilted my head backwards with his bony fingers and rolled up my eyelids to check the whites of my eyes. He told me to open my mouth and peer down my throat. Then he checked my pulse and reflexes. How do you feel, he asked. Tired, I said. Weak, he asked. Sick? A bit. He grunted. Have you been drinking much blood lately, he asked. As much as I'm supposed to, I said. But no human blood. No, I said softly. Okay, he said. Get ready, we're going out. Hunting? I asked. He shook his head. To see a friend. I got up on his back outside the van and he began running. When we were far enough away from the camp, he flitted and the world floated around us. I didn't really pay attention to where we were going. I was more concerned with my suit. I'd forgotten to get new clothes, and now, the more I examined it, the worse the suit seemed. There were dozens of small holes and rips, and the color was a lot grayer than it was supposed to be because of the dirt and dust. Strands of thread and fibers had come loose, and every time I shook an arm or leg, I looked like I was shedding hairs. I'd never been worried about clothes, but I didn't want to look like a bum. Tomorrow, I'd definitely find something new to wear. After a while, we approached the city, and Mr. Crupsley slowed down. He stopped outside the back of a tall building. I wanted to ask where we were, but he put a finger to his lips and made the sign for silence. The back door was locked, but Mr. Crupsley laid a hand over it and clicked the fingers of his other hand. It opened instantly. He led the way through a long, dark corridor, then set up a set of stairs into a bright lit hallway. After a few minutes, we came to a white desk. Mr. Crupsley looked around to make sure we were alone and rang the bell that hung from one of the walls. A figure appeared behind the glass wall on the other side of the desk. The door in the glass wall opened, and a brown-haired man in a white uniform and green mask stepped through. He looked like a doctor. "How may I," he began, then stopped Martin Cresply. "What are you doing in here, you old devil?" The man pulled out his mask, and I saw he was grinning. "Hello, Jimmy," Mr. Cresply said. The two shook hands and smiled at each other. "Long time no see." "Not as long as I thought it would be," the man called Jimmy said. "I heard you'd been killed. An old enemy finally rammed a stake through your rotten heart," or so the story went. "You should not believe everything you hear," Mr. Crupsley said. He put a hand on my shoulder and nudged me forward. "Jimmy, this is Darren Shawn, a traveling companion of mine. Darren, this is Jimmy Ovo, an old friend and the world's greatest pathologist." "Hello," I said. "Pleased to meet you," Jimmy said, shaking my hand. "You aren't do you belong to the club?" "He's a vampire," Mr. Crupsley said. "Only half of me," I snapped. "I'm not full vampire." "Please," Jimmy winced. "Don't use that word. I know what you guys are, and I'm fine with it. But the V word never fails to freak me out." He shivered playfully. "I think it's because of all the horror movies I watched when I was a kid. I know you're not like those movie monsters, but it's hard to get the image out of my mind." "What's a pathologist do?" I asked. "I cut corpses open to see how they died," Jimmy explained. "I didn't do it with a lot of bodies, just the ones who died in suspicious circumstances." "This is a city morgue," Mr. Crupsley said. "They store bodies that arrived at the hospital die when they're there." "Is that where you keep them?" I asked Jimmy, pointing at the room behind the glass wall. "Yep," he said cheerfully. He swung up a section of the desk and invited us through. I was nervous. I expected to see dozens of tables piled high with sliced open bodies, but it wasn't like that. There was one dead body covered from head to toe with a long sheet, but that was the one I could see. Otherwise, it was a huge, well-lit room with big filing cabinets built in the walls and lots of medical equipment scattered around the place. "How is business?" Mr. Crupsley asked as we sat on 3 chairs near the corpse on the table. Jimmy and Mr. Crupsley didn't pay attention to the dead person, and since I didn't want to look at a place, neither did I. "Slow enough," Jimmy answered. "The weather's been good, and there have been many car accidents. No strange diseases, no food epidemics, no collapsing buildings. By the way," he added, "I had an old friend of yours in here a few years back." "Oh," Mr. Crupsley frowned politely. "Who was that?" Jimmy sniffed heavily through his nose, then cleared his throat. "Gavner Pearl?" Mr. Crupsley hooted with delight. "How is the old dog? As clumsy as ever?" They started talking about their friend Gavner Pearl. I looked around while they were speaking, wondering where the bodies were kept. Finally, when they paused for breath, I asked Jimmy. He stood up and told me to follow. He led the way to the big filing cabinets and pulled one of the drawers out. There was a hissing sound, and a cloud of cold air arose from inside the drawer. When I cleared, I saw a sheet-covered form and realized the filing cabinets weren't filing cabinets at all. They were refrigerated coffins. "We stored the bodies here until we are ready," Jimmy said, "or until our next of kin comes to collect them." I looked around the room, counting the rows of drawer doors. "Is there a body behind each of these?" I asked. Jimmy shook his head. "We've only got 6 guests right now, not counting the one on the table. Like I said, it's quiet. And even during our busiest hours, most of our storage space goes unused. It's rare for us to be half full. We just like to be prepared for the worst." "Any fresh bodies in stock?" Mr. Cresply asked. "Wait a minute, and I'll check," Jimmy said. He consulted a large pad and flicked through the few pages. "There's a man in his 30s, Jimmy said. Died in a car crash just over 8 hours ago. Nothing fresher?" Mr. Cresply asked. "Afraid not," Jimmy replied. Mr. Crupsley sighed. "It will have to do." "Wait a minute," I said. "You're not going to drink from a dead person, are you?" "No," Mr. Crupsley said. He reached inside his cape and pulled out some of the small bottles where he stored a supply of human blood. "I've come for a refill." "You can't," I yelled. "Why not?" he asked. "It isn't right. It's not fair to drink from the dead. Besides, the blood will have turned sour." "It will not be at its best," Mr. Crupsley agreed, "but it will do for bottling. And I agree, a corpse is the ideal person to drain, since it has no use for the blood. It will take a lot to fill these bottles, too much to take from a living person." "Not if you took a little from several," I protested. "True," he said, "but that required time, effort, and risk. It is easier this way." "Dad doesn't speak like a vampire," Jimmy remarked. "He's still learning," Mr. Crupsley grunted. "Now lead the way to the body, please. We have not got all night." I knew it would be pointless to argue any more, so I shut my mouth and followed silently behind them. Jimmy slid out the body of a tall blond man and whipped back the sheet. There was a nasty bruise on the dead man's head, and his body was really white, but otherwise he looked like he might be sleeping. Mr. Crepsey made a long, deep cut along the man's chest, bearing his heart. He arranged the bottles beside the corpse, then got out the tube and stuck one end to the first of the bottles. He stuck the other to the end of the dead man's heart, then wrapped his fist around the organ and squeezed it like a pump. Blood crept slowly along the tube and into the bottle. When it was almost full, Mr. Crepsey pulled the tube out and jammed a cork into the neck of the bottle. He stuck the mouth of the tube into the second bottle and started filling that one. Raising the first bottle, he swallowed a mouthful and rolled it around his gums as though tasting wine. Good, he grunted, licking his lips. It is pure. We can use it. He filled 8 bottles, then turned to me with a serious look on his face. Darren, he said, I know you're reluctant to drink human blood, but it is time you got over your fear. No, I said immediately. Come on now, Darren, he growled. This person is dead. His blood is no good to him anymore. I can, I said, not from a corpse. But you will not drink from a live person, Mr. Crepsey exploded. You will have to drink human blood eventually. This is the best way to start. Listen, guys, Jimmy said. If you're going to feed, I think I should get out of... Quiet, Mr. Crepsey snapped. His eyes were burning into me. You have to drink, he said firmly. You're a vampire's assistant. It is time you behaved like one. Not tonight, I begged. Another time, when we go hunting. From a living person. I can't drink from a corpse. It's disgusting. Mr. Crepsey sighed and shook his head. One night you'll realize how silly you're being, he said. I just hope by the time you're not beyond being saved. Mr. Crepsey thanks Jimmy Ova for his help, and the two started talking about the past and their friends. I sat by myself while they chatted, feeling miserable, wondering how long I could go without human blood. When they were finished, we walked downstairs. Jimmy came with us and waved goodbye. He was a nice guy, and I was sorry we'd ever have to meet under dark circumstances. Mr. Crepsey didn't say anything the whole way home. And when we arrived back at the Cirque du Freak, he tossed me angrily to one side and pointed a finger at me. If you die, he said, it is not my fault. Okay, I replied. Stupid boy, he grumbled, and stormed off into his coffin. I stayed up a while longer and watched the sun rising. I thought a lot about my situation, what would happen when my strength faded, and I began to die. A half-vampire who wouldn't drink blood. It would have been funny if it wasn't so deadly. What should I do? That was the question that kept me awake long after the sun rose. What should I do? Forget about it and just drink human blood? Or stay true to my humanity and die? It's kind of, I don't know. Gets way better.